Apologies. Apologies for the delay. I was wanting to ensure that I had the most up-to-date information available to share with you regarding the evolving situation at White Island. Police search and rescue is supporting the National Emergency Management Agency following an eruption at White Island off the coast of Whakaari. Police were alerted at 2:17 p.m. At this stage, and please do keep in mind this is an evolving situation, but at this stage we believe around 100 people were on or around the island at the time, and some of those at this stage are unaccounted for. A number of people are reportedly injured and are being transported to shore. Police are urging members of the public to avoid the Whakatane Heads and Muriwai Road areas. Muriwai Road is closed from Harvey Street. I do want to just again share this is evolving at this stage. Obviously, does appear to be a very significant issue, particularly the scale of those affected at this stage. A joint press conference will be held at 5:30 between the National Emergency Management Agency and the police. They will be able at that stage to provide you with far greater detail in what is very much an evolving situation. But of course, I'm sure all our thoughts are with those affected at this stage. Look, I'll come to some of the weaker events for the week ahead. And then I'm going to run also through an update on the situation on the ground, particularly around the West Coast. I have the Minister of Transport here to give a little bit of an update after the weekend's weather events, then open to questions on any of these matters. This week, I am in the House on Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday afternoon, I'll join Minister Martin at the Oranga Tamariki Awards here at Parliament. On Thursday, I travel to Canterbury. Minister O'Connor and I will visit Sinlay's site, where they'll be making a sustainability announcement concerning their boilers, before speaking at the launch of the Primary Sector Council's vision for the agricultural, food and fibres sector. The evening, I'll be in Auckland. As you know, a massive cleanup is underway after severe weather swept across the South Island and Lower North Island over the weekend. I have been receiving regular updates from the Minister of Civil Defence, Minister Penny Henare, and the teams working with him. He's currently on the ground and reporting into me directly. The scale of the damage should not be underestimated, and no, we have a lot of work ahead to ensure things are returned back to normal. Our immediate priority is the safety and well-being of those affected first-hand communities, the farmers, tourists in particular. Today, Cabinet discussed the state of those most heavily affected areas, in particular on the West Coast and in South Canterbury, and Minister Damien O'Connor gave us an update as he was hearing through around impacts on the ground. The government will begin, and I will say begin, by contributing, as we do in these situations, with the 100,000 to the mayoral relief funds established across New Zealand to help with response and recovery efforts. The exact allocation will be sorted over coming days. This follows the release yesterday of 50,000 to support farming communities in the South Canterbury district. Again, I do want to just acknowledge this is very early days. We do this so that there is a discretion available for mayors to act immediately on some of the needs that they encounter straight away, and we'll be continuing to work alongside them in the relief efforts. The West Coast has been hit hard, and people are isolated at Fox Glacier and Franz Joseph. While those tourists that were stranded in Fox Glacier Township were able to leave yesterday, we do still have hundreds of people remain stranded in Franz Joseph. Evacuations already are underway in some cases for those with immediate needs, and we are force regarding possible military vehicle began at 2 p.m. Of some of those needs amongst those who are on the ground. NZDF have alerted their relevant transport units, including aircraft, so that they are at the ready. As I said, Minister Henare is on the West Coast today with the Director of Civil Defence Emergency Management, Sarah Stewart-Black, to see firsthand the impact on their ground. They attended a community meeting this morning in Franz Josef that was attended by between 300 and 400 people to provide locals and visitors to the area with an update on the situation. Dairy farmers on the West Coast and in South Canterbury are being assisted by the Ministry for Primary Industries staff members. Now, while we haven't heard of stock losses at this stage, we know it's very likely there may well be some, and that farmers are dealing with damaged fences, paddocks covered in silt, damaged infrastructure, and in some cases are having to dump milk. Of course, insurance covers financial loss, but there is always an emotional toll that we do not underestimate. Rural support trusts are available right across the country for those in need of support, and the $50,000 worth of government funding that is being unlocked to support farming community is channeled through these trusts to provide that really direct assistance. The National Emergency Management Agency has deployed an assistance team to support local efforts in Franz Josef. And NZDF P3 Orion aircraft left from Whanuapai at noon today. The plan there being to survey the area, and we expect to receive high quality images from the air to assist with the recovery efforts. Obviously, we also need to get the infrastructure operating again as quickly as possible. Cabinet heard the roading situation, but I'm actually going to ask the Minister to give the latest update in just a moment. One thing we've been assured of is that NZTA will pull out all the stops to restore our key highway lifelines. Further government support may be required once a full assessment of damage and needs can be undertaken. I also want to recognise communities who have looked out for one another and are currently supporting stranded visitors. And of course, in these moments, New Zealanders do an incredible job of rallying behind those who need that support and assistance. I know too that the Chief Executive of Destination West Coast wants to send the message that the rest of the West Coast is open. They still, of course, want to make sure that visitors know they can come to the region where there is plenty to see and do. I urge everyone, though, involved to take very good care of themselves and make sure that they do ask for assistance when they need it. Minister Twyford.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I give an update, I just want to acknowledge the work that's been done by Transport Agency staff, contractors and local councils over the weekend for their tireless efforts to reconnect the South Island, and particularly those parts that have been so badly hit by slips and floods. As of 4 p.m. today, State Highway 6 between Haast and Harehare remains closed to all traffic. State Highway 6 between Fox and Franz Josef through the Fox Hills is being targeted to open by the end of this week to all traffic. And this timeline has a bit of give in it, accounting for the road conditions required to make sure that all traffic can go through and the possibility of further adverse weather. North of there, State Highway 6 around Mount Hercules, because of the large number of slips there, clearing of that section of road will take longer. The Transport Agency is aiming to reopen this section of the road by Christmas, but they're still assessing the damage and working out exactly what will need to be done. State Highway 6 south of Hokitika to Harehare is open to emergency services and residents under escort only. And the road between Haast and Makarora is closed from 4 p.m. today until 10 a.m. tomorrow. NZTA are expecting that section of the state highway to be open to all traffic by the end of the week. Now, over on the other side of the island, State Highway 1 between Timaru and Christchurch also remains closed. But the floodwaters are receding, and NZTA expects it to open in the next 24 to 48 hours. However, the alternative route, that is Route 72, that goes through Darfield, is open as of midday today, and this is allowing people to travel north and south. The detour on 72 takes about an hour longer. I thought just to finish really by saying that the costs of extreme weather to the state highway network have doubled from $36 million in 2014-15 to $72 million in 2018-19. And our government has increased the state highway maintenance budget by over $200 million compared to the previous government. That's to a total of $2.1 billion, partly to cope with the cost of more frequent extreme weather events and the toll that they're taking on the highway network. Thank you.
Just one final message before we come to questions, and if I can sequence questions with anything relevant to transport issues in the south, and then we'll move to general topics. The final matter, I know it's of interest to many. Minister Jones will be releasing the Upper North Island supply chain strategy on Thursday. Now, whilst I won't be commenting on the detail of that or the detail of Cabinet's response, I do want to give context to that discussion, and I wish to make it clear that Cabinet is of the view that the ports of Auckland is not viable as the Upper North Island's key import port in the long term. For Cabinet, the question is not if, but where and when it will move. We agree there is more work to do, and details of that, as I say, alongside the final report, will be released on Thursday, and we acknowledge there is more work to do. But for now, I am very...
Or advices for the scale and nature of the injuries that some people may have suffered on White Island?
No, it's simply too early, certainly for the information that I have in operation. So essentially everything I know I have shared with you.
What's your understanding this is trying to get to the island?
Again, at this stage, I have simply the detail that they're undertaking an operation as we speak, that we believe around 100 people on or around the island at the time. Sorry.
Are they tourists?
That is my understanding, yes. There is and has been for some time, obviously, an operation that takes people for visits, and that is my understanding.
Are you aware of any fatalities?
Not at this stage. Anything on civil defence, the civil defence issues or issues on the coast?
What difference, if any, has the new agency, has that actually changed anything, or is it too early?
Sorry,
the new National Emergency Management Agency?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, at this stage, obviously, it's very early days, so I wouldn't wish to make any major sweeping assessments of impact at this stage, but actually in the aftermath of the weather events over the weekend, and obviously also White Island, that's something that we'll be keeping a keen eye on.
In terms of the comments about the increased frequency of weather events, I mean, is the NZTA or the government giving any thought to what you can do to increase the resilience of these networks?
Yeah, I've asked for advice about so we can understand better the frequency of these events and the impact they're having on the roading network. I think that the question of whether or not our roads can be built in a way that it makes them more resilient is something that we need to be looking into. I do think that the multimodal emphasis of our transport policy is a key way that we can deliver that resilience. And if you think about the way that coastal shipping came to the rescue after the Kokoda and Wellington earthquakes, having railroad and coastal shipping, to the extent that you can have multiple networks in the same corridor, is obviously going to make the transport system more resilient.
What about the railway line that's been washed out? Have you had any advice on that?
Yes, Kiwi Rail advised that it's still the ground is still flooded, and that's preventing them from properly assessing the state of the network. But the waters are receding, and they're hoping within 24 hours or so that they'll be in a position to assess the state of the line.
Confident that we have adequate early warning systems for volcanic events in New Zealand?
Well, certainly we do have an early warning. We do have a warning system that sets an alert level for our volcanic activity in New Zealand. But look, it is simply, obviously there's an operation currently underway. It is simply too early for me to make any judgments around the alert system and indeed what has happened today.
Where did they leave from? Was it Tauranga or Potiki or where?
Whakatane is my understanding. Okay.
On the Port of Portugal.
Sure, Lol. Free to go. Go ahead.
And just what's your view on the idea of it moving north? Do you think that's the economically viable option?
So where I've been consistent even before coming into government was simply that when it comes to Auckland as a key import port, that there is obviously significant environmental impacts for any future port expansion and a number of other reasons why ultimately I do not believe the current site is really a though. The real question for us as a government to properly assess is not necessarily if, but where it will be relocated to and when. That is a multi-billion-dollar question, and so I think it's really our responsibility, our duty on behalf of New Zealanders to make sure that we look at the evidence base, all of the analysis required in terms of economic and environmental impacts, and get that decision right.
Happy then with all the analysis and reports you've had so
Again,
far?
so I'm not going to get into the content of some of that analysis or any of the additional work. On Thursday, Minister Jones will be releasing the study that's been to date and next steps, but I'm going to leave that to Thursday. But I do think it's really important to give some context to that discussion and really share the view of Cabinet at this stage.
Minister Faafoi, why did he get off with just a minuscule slap on the wrist?
As I've made very clear, that what the Minister said was certainly not appropriate, but in fact he undertook no action whatsoever, and certainly obviously none that was inappropriate, because he actually didn't do anything, and that is
and tried to keep it quiet.
Again, as I've said, what he said was inappropriate, but in fact the Minister did nothing. In fact, that may well be what stirred the individual in question to raise it with the media, is because the Minister didn't do anything.
The Minister kept promising, bro, I've got a plan, I can't put anything in writing, it's moving, I'm on it, bro.
Minister Faafoi has accepted that what he said was inappropriate. He has apologised to me and to his colleagues, but as I say again, he didn't actually do anything. So none of his actions at all were inappropriate.
Acceptable that Immigration New Zealand uses cultural differences as a way of measuring how stable and genuine a relationship is?
I see that as an operational issue for Immigration New Zealand.
It's pointing out specifically problems around interracial or inter-ethnicity couples. Is that an okay measure for Immigration New Zealand to use?
I'm obviously not the one that makes individual Immigration New Zealand decisions.
Comfortable with Immigration New Zealand using cultural differences to decline?
Again, none of that criteria has changed. I see those as operational questions.
Does that send to inter-ethnicity couples that cultural differences are a problem for New Zealand government? Again,
multiple pieces of criteria are used by Immigration New Zealand. Ultimately, that criteria hasn't changed, and they're operational decisions, not ones that I obviously individually make.
Report, when you say the two questions, when and where, this, I presume, these are questions that you want your government to address before
the Upper North Island study that was done was in part about helping to answer those questions. I think when it comes to major infrastructure challenges, we've been a government that hasn't shied away from ensuring that we build an evidence base around decisions for New Zealand's long-term future. And part, of course, it's why we've established the Infrastructure Commission. So these are things that we believe need to be fully explored. We want to those decisions, though.
When do you think that
Minister Jones the space to talk about some of the timelines for future work?
The Children's Commissioner says there's been no significant change in the number of children in poverty. Is that a failure on your part?
So the Child Poverty Monitor that he's released today essentially is an assessment of the last government's policies. The data that it uses predates our government. Unfortunately, we won't have even the beginnings of a snapshot of the impact of our policies until the beginning of 2020, and even then it will only capture just part of our time in office. This is one of the frustrations of monitoring impact in the data that we get through following from policy changes. modelling, we know that up to 70,000 children will have been lifted out of poverty from some of the things that we've done, but we won't know that for some time.
You've only taken up 4 of the recommendations from the Independent Welfare Advisory Group.
Well, that's actually not correct. We have work underway on a much larger number of recommendations from that advisory group. One of the most significant, of course, moves that we made in the last budget was to index benefits to wages, which the Children's Commission themselves said would be one of the most significant things you could do in the long term to deal with the growing inequality for children in our country.
Of that number, 148,000.
You're not Jason, but I'll anyway.
Subject child poverty.
Yes. Sorry, what was the question again?
What do you think of the number 148,000 children?
I don't want any children to live in poverty. You know, it's one of the reasons why I got into politics. It's the reason why I've taken on the portfolio of child poverty reduction. It's the reason we put in place an Act of Parliament to finally agree on measurements for child poverty and to release that data. But again, I think it is important to point out that the Child Poverty Monitor, which, I encourage advocacy on child poverty, actually isn't taking into account any of the policies that we've brought in so far. In fact, my recollection is that the health data, I think, is from 2016. And so, look, yes, we should keep up the momentum. We need ongoing change, and I support the Children's Commissioner when he says that, but also I just think we need to make sure that we keep this in context, and this isn't a reflection of our government yet.
Has the new child poverty legislation made the Child Poverty Monitor redundant?
I believe actually the Children's Commissioner, he's hugely supportive of that legislation. It of course puts that decision making at the centre because now we get that information as part of the budget. But what we want to make sure, of course, is that we're continuing to have advocacy from all sides, and I expect that from the Children's Commissioner. He's made a decision he wants to vary up the way the Child Poverty Monitor works, and that's entirely within his remit to do that.
The lead researcher says that children are dying because of poverty. Is that acceptable?
Of course not. Child poverty in New Zealand, a wealthy country, I don't think should exist. That's the very reason we brought in the child poverty reduction legislation. It's the reason we spent $5.5 billion as a government and cancelled the tax cuts when we first came into the office. It's why we brought in the winter energy payment. It's why we increased the family tax credit. It's why we brought in the Best Start payment. It's why we increased paid parental leave. It's why we've increased the minimum wage. We want to rid this country of child poverty, and we are making huge progress. We just need to keep going.
Received a letter today from the former Auditor-General Martin Matthews. He wrote to you appealing his case.
I've received a letter from his lawyer. Again, I think even in that letter, it's really an acknowledgement, though, that this ultimately is an issue for the officers of Parliament rather than an issue for me.
What's your view of the case, of what happened there? Do you think it's appropriate what happened?
Look, my view is that it's something that does need to be dealt with by the officers of Parliament. It was a decision obviously made during the last Parliament, but that doesn't change the fact that given the employment relationship really exists with Parliament itself, it's not for me to determine.
It needs to be dealt with, essentially dealt with regardless of whether it's the Officers of Parliament Committee or any other committee. Do you think it does need to be reopened though?
Again, I do not see it as my place to cast a judgment on that. It is a matter for Parliament and the Officers of Parliament. That is the place where this decision should be dealt with.
People in that committee then serve on your cabinet, and what's being alleged now is that they essentially threatened to label him as disabled. That would seem to be severe misconduct for an MP and then a minister to then sit in your cabinet. Do you have a view on that?
Again, it's not for me to comment on allegations that are being made externally in that regard. This is still an employment matter. And I do need to make sure that I respect that.
Are there allegations being made against your cabinet ministers?
Again, this is make sure and the Sorry?
Did you advise Chris Faafoi not to offer his resignation?
Again, I do want to reiterate that the Minister, in this case, of course, his language is my view on that. But what also matters is what he did. And in this case, he actually did nothing.
perceived conflict of interest?
The minister undertook no action on behalf of this case, but his language was poorly chosen and wrong. I've taken it as an opportunity to remind everyone, of course, in personal relationships, they do what they can do as a member of Parliament and what they can't.
Do you have confidence in the Department of Internal Affairs when it's defending the Hepatitis Foundation for misusing hundreds of thousands of dollars of public money?
So look, that's not something I feel have had a brief.
Mostly Ministry of Health funding to be using that money in restaurants and business class flights.
He has much more information on that particular case than I, and I would direct questions to him on that one. On a particular case where allegations are being made. Do feel free to ask me again in the usual round if you'd like, but the Sorry.
There's a new Prime Minister in Finland, or there will be this week.
Yes, a young woman, as I understand.
Taking the Aussie on.
No, I never dispense advice because every political situation is different. But of course, it's very difficult.
The way that male Prime Ministers are treated in the past, do you think you're treated differently?
No, I look at it and routinely analyse.
Have you seen the videos of others because your face is on the front?
Well, I haven't put that down to me being a woman. I've put that down to me being a my is like supermarkets where I used to work, who were going to have to turn them back around. No, I would not, but different.
A more substantive response to the Welfare Advisory Group recommendation.
Always mindful that it takes, that you can only go so far before you start making. So what we have acknowledged, for instance, is we see significant moves in that area as a government, including some of those that I've already listed, but even other indications of direction of
indicated that probably by the end of this year, but it looks like that's been kicked out for
do require whilst we've been able to give direct, we need to go through different processes.
Minister Faafoi acknowledged in his messages with Jason Kerrison a conflict of interest. Do you admit that there was at least a perceived conflict of interest?
I've acknowledged that the language was wrong.
Perceived conflict of interest, though?
Again, the minister was not that his language.
You mentioned that some of the data.
From my recollection, and that's only particular to my recollection, is the health data, but I would want to double check that.
You know, the public service being slow or what? Back, I mean, in this technological age, why are you not able to say what your policies are affecting?
Oh yes, it is frustrating, and in fact this was something that we discussed at great length, not just the lag but also the quality of the data. We've had issues just because of the we put additional, but that hasn't the second lag then is the survey itself, and then of course that data is appropriate. And it is frustrating, yes, because it means that something that we started when we first came into office within the first 100.
Is there actually anything you can do on that though? I mean, can you put the boot up people and get people moving faster, or is it actually a bigger problem than that?
I think it's actually just ION is robust. This out when we were working on the child poverty reduction. Do than what we've already got. That's why we do try and undertake modelling. But even that, can't be modelled. What I would forewarn is that in 2020, even to the impacts of the families package, even at that stage. So that again won't be the full beginning because of how long families would have had the. Yeah.
Is Cabinet of the view that any of the functions currently carried out at the port continue to be carried out?
You'll know. Port, and part obviously of this other activity that goes on around cruise ships. In the key import port, we're of the view that. All right, thanks everyone.